The medic, Samuel F. Jenkins, a middle-aged man who looks as though he has seen far too much for any man to have seen. He had a long blank stare. That was just one of the things that had stuck with him after the war. Those who observe him would say that he, more often than not, lives within a world different from ours. Jenkins had been a combat medic in the Vietnam War, and after he had returned home, he was never quite as he had been before he had left, because for Jenkins, he had never returned home. He had fabricated a false reality in which he had never left, what he called the hot zone. Aside from his perception of reality being in shambles, the war had also caused physical implications that may not have seemed like much in 1972, but now, 23 years later, it was very clear the effects the war had had on his body. He looked much older than the 49 years that he was. He had pale and wrinkled skin beyond his years from the intense stress the war had caused him. He had a terrible cough that he would go into fits with. This could be attributed to the chemical exposure he had come into contact with during his deployments. His hair had already gone thin and gray, and his face was long and tired. The medic had come to acquire a small lot with a very small building attached to the purchase. This lot is located on the northern side of a small New Mexican town that he lived in. The town is known only to those who call themselves residents. The town is known as Los Burlos, and it is just a small desert town that is connected to the world only by Interstate 40 that runs east to west along the south edge of town. Some might say that the old medic is in competition with other more professional medical practice in town, but if you took the care to observe further, he took care of those who could not afford the more expensive rates of the other practice. Jenkins did not charge for his services. His hallucinated reality did not allow for such things. Those he helped were, in his eyes, just wounded U.S. soldiers or civilian Vietnamese who had been caught in the crossfire. Initially, the townspeople thought it had just been an act, but after a few years of never-breaking character, they realized that he was sick, even more so than the people he helped, and so they began to leave him to himself. Perhaps the only reason his practice had not been shut down and him sent off to the loony bin was because the medical help was effective, rudimentary in modern eyes perhaps, but effective. As well, he provided for those who could not afford it, and so the authorities, seeing him as no threat to those he treated, let him be. 1 week back in May of '82, he had closed down his practice. When those looking for help came to his door, they could look around the side of his small building adjoining the lot, and they found the man with a large brush and a can of bright yellow paint. Though it seemed that he was madly painting random lines, curves, and angles, by the end of the week he had ended up with a large H surrounded by a crude circle. This, described by him, to serve as a rudimentary helipad, so that I have the capability to call for a medevac for those cases that I am unable to handle myself. But being that this wasn't actually war, there came very few cases he was unable to solve. Jenkins sometimes took walks, never far from the hospital, but still, he occasionally passed the school that was nearby. Instead of seeing it as it was, he saw it as the main compound for the field base at which he was stationed. All the students were recruits in his eyes, fresh from home and still so full of life. Back in Vietnam, he had been through so much. He had stood by so many of his comrades trying fruitlessly to save them. By the time he had received his orders to return home, war had already done its damage on his body and mind. All he saw were orders to redeploy to another hellhole The transport home was just another ride off into the jungle, and the not-so-warm welcome he received when he got home was the final element it took to cement the false perception that he was not home, but still in Vietnam. After his CO sent him off, he began to wander, trying to find the unit he thought he was meant to meet up with, and so he began to wander. A time later, for reasons unknown to anyone, perhaps even unknown to him, he had chosen to stop wandering here, in Los Burlos, New Mexico. Taking care of patients was nothing new after decades of doing so, but this one caused a reaction in the old combat medic. There was nothing inherently special about this particular man. He lived in Los Burlos, was struggling with financial troubles, and had come to the medic with the rather trivial problem of back pain. However, it was something this man did that caused something incredible to happen, at least for a short time. After the medic had finished his treatment, the man began thanking him profusely. The medic had received casual thanks upon departure of his previous patients, but nothing of this caliber before. The man thanked him for everything he had done, not only for him, but for everyone he knew, praising the medic for his kindness and generosity. This was when the medic, for the first time since its implementation, had broken free of his false reality. Jenkins blinked his eyes rapidly, seeing the man and everything else as it truly was. Somewhat dazed, he saw the man off, then exited the building, taking in sight of the small New Mexican town for the first time. In that moment, he felt joy and excitement in realization that he was not still in Vietnam, and that he was not still fighting. But this moment was fleeting. Slowly, sandy desert plains shifted back to the dense jungle, and the school appearing as the military base as it had before. The smile left his face, and the joy left his heart. He turned sharply and headed back into the hospital to prepare for more wounded soldiers.